Mr. Vice Chair, we're still waiting for Governor Lewis, but if you wouldn't mind starting the meeting for us. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the MAG Economic Development Committee. This meeting is now called to order. Before we proceed, I would like to announce that last Wednesday, the MAG Regional Council approved the appointments to the EDC of Scarlet Spring. Is she here in present? And also Dr. Court Monroe, Superintendent of the Cave Creek Unified School District. For those around the table, please turn on your microphones when speaking. For those participating via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. If you would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the information table in the hallway and give it to MAG staff. If you are parked in the garage, parking violators are available on the information table in the hallway. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available for MAG staff. We'll now begin with the meeting with a roll call of all members. MAG, would you please take a roll call?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go through the list of members. Please make sure that you're unmuted and indicate if you're present when I call your name. Ruben Alonso, Steve Betts, Tony Bradley, Paul Carden.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Crane.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Durham.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Edwards. Supervisor Thomas Galvin. James Griffiths.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Janine Guy.
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Judd.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Hampton. Mayor Hermosillo. Sintra Hoffman. Councilmember Keating.
Here.
Thank you. Jim Kenny. Mayor LaVault.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Chair Lewis is here. Councilmember Luna.
Present.
Thank you. Vice Chair Melnar.
Present.
Thank you. Mike Markham.
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember McMahon. Thank you. Dr. Court Monroe Not here. Councilmember O'Brien.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Oliphant.
I'm present.
Thank you. Councilmember Pineda.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Rowe. Darcy Renfro. Mark Sanders.
Present.
Thank you. Todd Sanders. Councilmember September.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Smith. Mayor Smith. Scarlett Spring. Thank you. Marisa Walker.
Mayor Smith's here. I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Thank you. Marisa Walker. Bob Worlsley.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Okay, thank you. And I'll regain the chair. Thank you to the vice chair, Councilmember Molinar. Appreciate for starting us off. And we will next go to the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. And please stand if you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. And we will go to the call to audience. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. We have at least 15 minutes that is provided for the call to audience. And MAG staff will give you a speaker card if there is no, if there is a public comment. MAG staff, do we have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have received no online or person comments for today's meeting on any item.
Thank you. With that, we will go to item 4, the approval of the June, August 2nd, 2022 and September 13th, 2022 Economic Development Committee meetings minutes.
I move for approval.
Thank you. There's a motion for
Second.
approval. And there is a second. Thank you. If there are no comments, please, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. If there are no abstentions or no against, thank you. Both minutes have been approved.
Excuse me, Chair,
Yes.
can we, for the record, who made the first motion, who made the second? David Luna made the motion, and who made the second? Steve Betts. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go down to item 5, the MAG Economic Development Report. Yes,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. We will do a roll call of those joining online via Zoom for approval of the minutes.
thank you.
I will go down the list of members participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Paul Carden.
Approve.
Thank you. Mayor Durham, Vice Mayor Durham.
Approve.
Thank you. James Griffiths.
Yay.
Thank you. Councilmember Janine Guy.
Approve.
Thank you. Councilmember Keating.
Approved.
Thank you. Mayor LaVault.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Oliphant.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Pineda.
Yes.
Thank you. Mark Sanders.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. Bob Worlsley.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed who is online? Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minutes vote passed unanimously.
Okay, thank you for that. With that, we'll go to item 5, the MAG Economic Development Report. And what we will do is we will have the MAG Policy and Government Relations Director, Nathan Pryor. He will give this report, and this item is for information. Mr. Pryor.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the EDC. We do have quite a robust agenda today, so I'll move through the report quickly. Next slide, please. We're pleased to announce that we had Secretary of Economy from the state of Sonora, Armando Villa, visit us, along with the state of Sonora representative in Arizona, David Figueroa, visit us here at the MAG office. So we're always looking to have conversations with our counterparts in Mexico and Sonora. So this was an opportunity to talk about future collaboration opportunities with state of Sonora in Arizona in our region. So that was a good conversation. Next slide, please. Of course, we held our 9th annual Arizona Council meeting. So this was held at the League of Cities and Towns Conference. We had 2 years of hosting this event virtually, so it was great to be back in person. Had over 120 attendees, so strong participation from those in our region, the state of Arizona and the state of Sonora. Would like to thank Mayor Hermosillo from City of El Mirage for hosting Master of Ceremonies. I also like to thank Mayor Wires from Glendale, Mayor Gallego from Phoenix for their participation during the event. Also, thank you to our EDC Vice Chair, of course, Councilmember Ray Melnar from Glendale for participating, along with acknowledgement to the Mayor of Guaymas, Carla Cordova, and the Mayor of Town of Oro Valley, Joe Winfield, for their participation. And finally, a thanks to ADOT for Mark Sanders for his participation in discussing the Arizona Sonora Infrastructure Master Plan. So the next time we plan to do this, it will be in August 31st in conjunction again with the League of Cities and Towns Conference in Tucson, Arizona. So a lot more information to come. Always successful event that we're proud and pleased to put on. Next slide, last slide, please. Just want to acknowledge our chairman. Congratulations to him for being recognized with the Leon Grant Spirit of the Community as an honoree. This is held by the Phoenix Indian Center at their annual Silver and Turquoise Ball, which is coming up on October 21st. I'm sure if you went to the Phoenix Indian Center website, there's opportunity to buy tickets to the ball. But just want to acknowledge Governor Lewis for all his work in our community. So congratulations, Governor Lewis. With that, Mr. Chairman, that completes our report.
Okay, thank you, Nathan, for that. Are there, anyone from our group can contact Nathan if you have any further questions. So we appreciate the report and the brevity. So we'll go down to, and this is for information. So we'll go to agenda item 6, which is the draft MAG policy principles. Sapna Gupta, our senior policy program manager, will present, and this agenda item is for action to recommend approval. You may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Economic Development Committee. As the chair stated, the MAG policy principles present MAG's policy approaches for a wide range of its efforts, ranging from specific legislative items to the broader roles and responsibilities for the agency. We developed these principles a few years ago, and we update them and present them for a vote at this time of the year through the committee process. Next slide, please. The MAG policy principles are in a document that describes what the agency is about. It's posted under the About Us section on the website, and it has been very useful in a number of ways. We can leave it behind after meetings with our stakeholders that range from state legislators, local officials, industry organizations, and congressional offices. It is one way to share the goals and the mission of MAG with the public and with stakeholders, whether they're at the local, state, or federal level. More importantly, they're an approved set of policy principles that can draw upon. We revise this brochure annually, and if there's a development that comes up during the year, we have these policy principles that we can refer to. As you can see on this slide, we have kept the graphics that show the connection between infrastructure and employment, as well as the proposed investment plan from last year's slide. The figure of 82% of the jobs being within 2 miles of transportation corridors have remained the same as in prior years. Next slide, please. Now, these updated policy principles are included in your agenda packet. We'd like to go over some of the changes in this update. We have updated some of the language and in some cases simplified it, especially in some of the bullets. However, the major underlying policies themselves have not changed from last year. I will go through the edits to this document to clarify and describe them a little better. Next slide, please. So in the transportation section, we indicate that the transportation section, we have made edits in the transportation section, in the economic development section, in the environmental section, and we've added some additional language in the section for regional analytics, as well as human services I will describe later. Next slide, please. The script is very small. I did not expect you to read it, but I've just highlighted the sections where the changes have happened. Next slide, please. So this is the change in transportation section. The bullet, however, is the same from last year. However, we have placed it as the first bullet to emphasize the critical importance of getting infrastructure funding. Next slide, please. For economic development, the middle bullet. The middle bullet before had description language on the border crossing card and MAG's effort. This was an effort that was initiated under MAG and was taken to the other metropolitan planning organizations and COGS throughout the state. The good news is that that initiative was part of a funding bill for Department of Homeland Security a few years ago. So MAG currently is monitoring that progress. It's under the purview of CBP. The middle bullet now is to emphasize the importance of communicating infrastructure investment for the region. Next slide, please. In the environmental section, we have clarified the language in 2 of the bullets and as well as simplified it. Next slide, please. These are the additions of wording that we've made to the regional analytics division as well as to the human services. This is to clarify and describe the breadth of their work. So we've added the wording of such as housing and education, as you can see highlighted on the slide in regional analytics. And we've added, quote unquote, with related housing activities, as you can see highlighted here in human services. Again, this is to describe the breadth of the work that the teams do in those 2 divisions. Next slide, please. Mr. Chair, members of the Economic Development Committee, this concludes my presentation. These policy principles will also be presented to the other MAG policies, including the Management Committee next week, the Transportation Policy Committee, the Executive Committee to the Regional Council, and finally, at the end of the month, to the Regional Council. This concludes my comments.
Thank you for your presentation. Does any member of the committee this time have any questions or discussion on this item? Yes, sir.
First off, terrific job. I very much like the changes, the clarifications. I just had a question on the last one about related housing. What is that intended to cover?
Mr. Chair and members of the Economic Development Committee, thank you for your question. So when adding with related housing activities is to really capture the breadth of the work that the Human Services team does. While the work, the great focus of the work is on addressing homelessness, housing, especially affordable housing, is an absolute part of the equation. And so we wanted to make sure that we added this language to reflect the efforts in this section.
Can you go back to the language? Homelessness, with related housing activities. Okay.
So this is also communicating with the Multifamily Housing Association, for example, being in communication with the cities to understand what kind of housing developments are in the pipeline, their level of affordability, really to monitor that activity.
Sort of broadening the focus on related housing activities. Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the Economic Development Committee, we also have been providing data and technical support to the League of Arizona Cities and Towns and supporting their efforts in the legislature on the housing committee that's underway too.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Councilman.
I also wanted to draw attention to Amy St. Peter's work with the city of Mesa as it relates to homelessness. So we appreciate her efforts in coming up with information that we we certainly took a data-driven approach, and we worked together with MAG on that. So I just wanted to make sure that we supported this effort.
Councilwoman Ryan?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the clarifications in some of the language. I think that's very important. One of the changes talked about communicate the critical importance of infrastructure investments, and my concern is that we as as an organization or association are not highlighting the importance of water a little bit more in this document. We certainly are at a critical point related to water. And so I'm curious about why not bring that to this document.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Economic Development Committee. Thank you for this question. Absolutely, water is an important element of infrastructure. And the emphasis in this document does not reflect the breadth of the work that MAG does. And so MAG is in contact and is very well monitoring the issue related to water. And it's something that's not specifically mentioned here. Partly it's because of the critical importance this year of the infrastructure and the enabling legislation for Prop 400. But we have made a note of it. However, MAG as an organization does look at solid waste. That's part of its portfolio of activities. And for water, we'll make a note of it. And it's something that the agency does talk to its counterparts and is monitoring it. And Eric has.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Economic Development Committee, just to expand on what Sabina was talking about. So there is the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association, which focuses more on water supply issues in the valley too. So once again, we don't have that. One of our core missions is water, because we have a sister agency that really focuses on that. So just to explain that a little bit better, we do monitor water. Obviously, water is very important for our growth too. And so we do monitor it, but there are other organizations that have that as their lead responsibilities.
Are there any other steps we might be?
I have another question. Mr. Chair, can I take the floor?
Excuse me, we still have Council Member O'Brien.
Thank you.
Yes, go right ahead.
Is there any other steps we'll be doing to maybe highlight more importantly, or working with AMWA? And I sit on AMWA as a member there, and I know we're working diligently from that perspective. I just think that it would be important for the association, this body, to look at maybe elevating it as an important issue for us.
And Mr. Chair, members of the EDC will certainly take that into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if there's nobody with a question here in person, staff, is there anybody, I guess the individual, could you recognize yourself, and you can also ask your question at this time?
Thank you. I'll raise my hand here. Thank you. Bob Worsley. The document doesn't seem to address, I know in the clean air area, it's important in transportation, but the rapid evolution of electric vehicles and charging stations relate to the air quality issue as well, as just infrastructure for transportation. I don't see anything in here about the electrification of the transportation system. You have a couple of states now, California and New York, that have committed to a date when they won't sell gas vehicles, internal combustion engines. They'll be going to electric. I'm not saying Arizona will be doing that anytime soon in terms of a mandate, but it's certainly happening in the industry. So just some comments that's missing completely here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Eric?
Mr. Henderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Economic Development Committee. We will certainly add that we're very active in that area, and so there was an omission on our part. So we'll add that to this document as it moves forward.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, both in person or online?
Sorry, Chair. One more.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson, along with the electric vehicle, are we also playing a role in looking at hydrogen and how that can be an alternative fuel source?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Economic Development Committee, we're looking at all the alternative fuel sources for propulsion other than fossil fuels.
Okay, so we would be more generic and not just say electric vehicle.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you need a motion to recommend?
Prior to the approval of this item, are there members of the public who have submitted comments or a speaker card on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have not received any comments on this item.
Okay, if not, then yes, a motion would be in order.
I would make a motion that we recommend the policy as presented with the potential modifications that staff is going to look into.
Okay, thank you. And sir,
I second the motion.
thank you. Do we have the? Okay, if we have the motion and the second, can I have a voice vote of those in the room? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay, thank you. And staff, can you take a roll call of the members participating virtually?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Economic Development Committee. I will go down the list of members participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Paul Carden.
Aye.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Durham.
Aye.
Thank you. James Griffiths. Councilmember Janine Gang.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Keating. Mayor Lavalde.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Oliphant.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Pineda.
Aye.
Thank you. Mark Sanders.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. Bob Worsley.
Aye.
Thank you. Is there anyone whom I missed?
I apologize. It's James Griffiths, and I'm an aye.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
This is Randy Keating. I'm a yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the Economic Development Committee, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for your comments as well. We will go to item 7, economic analysis of the Proposition 400 Extension Investment Plan. We addressed the impact at the September 13th special meeting. Here with a follow-up is MAG Transportation Funding Policy Program Manager John Bullen and Transportation Planner 3, Arminta Syed. This item is for information and discussion. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Economic Development Committee. Very pleased to be here today. We're actually debuting this information for you all. So this has been a big undertaking. We'll talk a little bit more about the process, but a lot of work has gone on over the last 2 months to bring this together, and thrilled to be here today to present it to you all. Next slide, please. So quickly, I'll give you guys a brief overview of really our transportation network and where we're at today before turning it over to Arminta Syed to walk through the results of the economic analysis. Then conclude really by emphasizing why we need to get this done as quickly as possible. There are some real consequences to not having enabling legislation in place. And the sooner we can get this to the ballot or have a path to the ballot, the better. And certainly want to familiarize you all with some of those consequences. Next slide, please. So first with an overview. Next slide, please. So really the transportation network we know today can be attributed to our investment over the past 40 years or so. Before Proposition 300, our region, our high capacity transportation network consisted of I-17, parts of I-10, and parts of US 60. Under Proposition 300 and Proposition 400, we've been able to build the Loop 101, the Loop 202, the Loop 303, State Route 51, finish the US 60 and State Route 143, in addition to construction or improving hundreds of miles of arterial roadways, constructing the region's high-capacity transit network and investing in more than 7 million revenue miles of bus transit every year. Next slide, please. That investment has paid off. Really, the rapid growth that we've seen since 1985 can be directly tied back to these investments. It is quite impressive. Next slide, please. These investments have saved hundreds of hours of time for people and businesses. This is directly translated into cost savings. It has improved property values. It has made our region a more desirable place. Next slide, please. When we look at major locates over the past 30 years or so, there's a direct correlation with where those locates go in and transportation infrastructure that is completely intentional. Next slide, please. One of the primary factors that we've been able to draw so many of these businesses and that we see such success is really because of the competitive advantage that our regional transportation network provides. The chart on the screen shows a table from the Texas A&M Transportation Institute's annual mobility report. What does it tell you? It tells you that amongst its peers and really amongst all the major metro regions, Phoenix consistently has the lowest travel times, the lowest congestion levels, and more travel time reliability than everyone else. This is a huge selling point, and this is why we've been able to enjoy such prosperity. You can look back at past reports and you will see the same theme over and over and over. Our region does resoundingly well. Next slide, please. One of the reasons why this is so incredible is because on a relative basis, our investment in transportation is lower than our peers. One of the first tasks that we undertook as part of the development of the new RTP and extension of Proposition 400 program was to do a peer region analysis. Where are our competitive regions? What are they investing in? And what are their levels of investment? Next slide, please. And what we found is that on a relative basis, our investment levels are low. The chart on the screen shows our investments relative to several of our peer agencies, including Dallas, Houston, Salt Lake City, San Diego, and Austin. Keep in mind that this chart is approximately 3 years old at the time. On the far end, you see Campo, that's the Austin area. Since then, voters have approved a dedicated property tax to build and expand their light rail system. So the proportional investment is even higher than our region. It is quite outstanding to see what we have done with so few resources. Next slide, please. We're really fortunate that we've been able to make smart investments and get ahead of development. However, those investments have to continue if we want to keep pace and keep competitive in this environment. Our plan does just that. We will continue to have a world-class transportation system so long as we can continue to make those investments. In light of the veto, however, what we wanted to do was to more directly understand the tie between transportation investments and our region's economy. Next slide, please. To that end, the MAG Regional Council Executive Committee approved funding at the beginning of August to perform a comprehensive economic assessment. That work is being done in coordination with GPAC. This is a work that normally takes 6 months to a year to complete. There has been teams working around the clock to make it happen sooner, recognizing the importance of getting this done for our region. So today, we wanted to go over the results of that analysis. Significantly more work continues to be underway, but we felt it was important to get this message out as quickly as possible. So with that, I will turn it over to the project manager of this work, Armenta Saeed, who will walk you through those results.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. For different, thank you. Apologies if you couldn't hear me beforehand. But just to summarize, we went ahead, we partnered with EBP US Inc. We used their in-house software. The TREDIS model, that was something we've used previously in the MAG region. So we were able to leverage a lot of that past familiarity and expertise of the region. And so the way the TREDIS model works is that it compares two different worlds and it calculates differences in travel characteristics between the two. And so for purposes of this exercise, we created two scenarios, one that was inclusive of the investments included under the extension investment plan and compared that to a scenario that didn't include those improvements. And so we were able to calculate the travel differences between the two, and then from that quantify the overall impact to the region and the economy. Next slide, please. So before I get into the results, here's a quick snapshot of what was actually included in this analysis. The way the TREDIS model works is that it's reliant on inputs from our MAG travel model. And so our MAG travel model includes all of the capital costs that are funded through the extension. What it doesn't include is some of those smaller programs that reflect non-capital costs. And so all of that to say is these results that I'm about to share with you today, although staggering in itself, are likely more on the conservative side as they're not considering the impact of those smaller non-capital programs. Next slide, please. So here is a quick snapshot of the findings from our study. So first of all, from a travel perspective, we found that implementing the extension investment plan will create a decrease in congestion across all travel modes and all trip purposes. Something that complemented that very nicely is that we saw an increase in speeds across all travel modes. On average, this increase was about 1 to 2 miles per hour. Doesn't seem like a lot, but when you think about all of the trips that occur within this region on a daily basis, at that aggregate level, that level of increase is significant. And then finally, we saw a shift in modal trips taken. So specifically, with transit, we saw an increase in over 100,000 trips annually. All of these point to a shorter and more reliable commute and better accessibility. So then when we quantify that impact to the society, what we found is that it saved the region as a whole $73 billion over the 25-year period. $40 billion alone is savings for our local businesses in terms of their travel time and increased travel reliability. $4.4 billion alone is just savings from freight logistics costs. Next slide, please. But the really major piece of that impact is the outcome that's derived from these societal travel benefits. And so all of that time that's being saved, all of those costs that are being saved from vehicle operating costs, all of that gets reinvested back into our economy. And that helps our economy grow. It helps it become more efficient. And in turn, it helps our region become that much more attractive and competitive. Next slide, please. And so here is the outcome of what happens when that $73 billion is reinvested. First of all, we see an increase in net business sales of $113 billion over that 25-year period. That's $4.5 billion in local business sales every single year. Of that, the value that's added back to the economy, the gross regional product, totals about $60 billion. Income growth for the region over this 25-year period totals about $40 billion, $2.4 billion every single year. And then in terms of job growth, we see that the extension plan helps to support and create about 31,600 new jobs every single year. Next slide, please. And so all of these different effects help to make our region more competitive. But in addition, what we found is that our extension plan is specifically tailored to the growth that this region is experiencing. Next slide, please. And so what I mean by that is that the industries that are already our largest GDP contributors are the ones that are benefiting the most from our proposed investment plan. And that's because they're more reliant on the proposed modal improvements that we've included in the extension than other industries. Say, for example, the semi-manufacturing Semiconductor manufacturing facilities. They are disproportionately reliant on truck traffic in relation to other travel modes. So it makes sense that they benefit more from our extension investment plan than other industries. Next slide, please. And so when you break down our results by industry, that's exactly what you see. The key industries that are already growing in the region are the ones that grow even more as a result of the extension plan. But what's really significant here is that impact not only on job growth, but job quality. In fact, what we find is that 71% of those net new annual jobs are in median to high wage thresholds, and that all of those jobs are in growing occupations, meaning that we'll actually be able to accommodate that new level of employment. Next slide, please. So jobs are growing, industries are growing, employment levels are growing, your commute time is not. And that's because of the proximity of the proposed investments to regional job centers. This was something that was very consistent with the feedback that we heard from the public when we were developing the plan, strong support for reliable and shorter commute times. And so what we find is by implementing the investment plan, 87% of those projects actually help to enhance access to regional job centers. And in some cases, some of these improvements are absolutely necessary to provide an acceptable level of service to certain centers. For example, the improvements on Loop 303 and the interchange with I-17. Next slide, please. It's the same proximity of investments that helps drive interest for new investment in the region. John shared earlier a slide that showed business locates and their proximity to our freeway corridors. As our region grows, this pattern will continue. So it's extremely significant that the investment plan will help to create or improve access to 87,000 acres of developable land. The other side of that is that proximity to these investments also help to increase the value of these properties. Next slide, please. And so when you consider the fact that 2/3 of the developable land are state land parcels, proceeds from which are invested back into the region through our public school system, the Prop 400E investments provide a direct benefit back to the region in terms of the increase in property values, estimated to be about 69 million, that are invested back into the region. And so that concludes a high-level overview of the economic impact analysis. At this point, I'll turn it back to John to go into some further specific details.
Thank you, Armenta. Next slide, please. So one of the other attributes we really wanted to focus on today is why we need a patch to the ballot as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. So the extension of Proposition 400 is something that's been consuming this agency for approximately the last 4 years, critically important. On the screen, this is a slide that you all might have been familiar with. We showed this a lot during plan development. Really, we spent 3 years developing the plan. That was ultimately approved by the MAG Regional Council back in 2021. And 2022 is really set aside to go through the process of securing enabling legislation. Maricopa County is the only county in the state of Arizona that requires state legislative approval to go to its voters, as well as the vote itself, which was originally scheduled for November 2022. That schedule is very intentional. We developed that schedule with project development activities in mind, both project development for projects programmed in our current Proposition 400 program, as well as those projects that were slated in phase 1 of the extension. The veto has had an impact. As we talked about several weeks ago, we walked through what the potential impacts are, but very much on a project development side, we're already seeing impacts, and I want to walk you through several examples. Next slide, please. So when we say that Proposition 400 expires in 3 years, that seems like a long time away. However, in transportation terms, that's right around the corner. Why is that? It's because project development takes a very long time. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you see the project development schedule of State Route 30, the center segment of State Route 30 specifically. This is a project that was initiated, the first phase, the scoping and environmental phase, back in 2005. It took 15 years to complete. While this is certainly an outlier example, suffice to say, even when you're looking at smaller projects, it takes at least 2 years to get through the initial scoping environmental phase, and then another 2 years to get through the design and right-of-way acquisition. Most of these activities take place behind the scenes. There's a lot of fanfare when we break ground, but there's a lot of work that has to occur before then. So with our original schedule, we were able to accelerate some of these project development activities. You would have seen projects break ground as soon as 2026, if not earlier. There are real consequences now, and there are real economic consequences to that. Next slide, please. So first example I want to walk you through is the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC for short. So back in 2020, very exciting news for our state. We were able to land the largest foreign direct investment in state history, TSMC. That announcement included an initial $12 billion investment with 1,800 jobs. Since that announcement, projections actually increased. They plan to increase their investment here in this region, here in the state, to a total of $35 billion with 11,000 jobs. Critically important for the region and the state's economy. Next slide, please. So that facility is coming in at the intersection of Loop 303 into I-17. So to be able to support its initial opening, the region actually invested almost $130 million to construct 2 new interchanges along Loop 303. Those interchanges are under construction today, and those interchanges are 100% funded through the regional half-cent sales tax. Simply put, without that dedicated half-cent sales tax, it is likely those 2 projects would still be in the planning phase. Next slide, please. And while that will support the project's initial opening, additional investment is needed. And that's because Loop 303 is still an interim freeway. It is 2 lanes in each direction. The interchange with I-17 is still an interim interchange. A full system interchange is needed. As a matter of fact, when you look at some of the employment projections associated with TSMC, some of those movements start to break down as soon as 2025. That's just with the initial investment. Next slide, please. In total, we need approximately $335 million of infrastructure improvements to bring those 2 facilities up to where we had planned them. Next slide, please. Obviously, TSMC has plans to continue to invest and increase their investment. However, without the infrastructure, there might be consequences. They might choose to delay that investment. They might choose to defer that investment. Even a delay, we're talking big dollars. A 1-year delay would result in $30 million a year in lost labor income. 1-year delay, $102 million in lost economic output. So to put that into simpler language, if TSMC looks and sees that the infrastructure is not there to support expanded operations, they might choose to delay that investment. That's real dollars to the state. If we fail to get the extension altogether and can't build those necessary improvements, the impact is $7 billion over a 10-year period alone. These are real issues. And had we had a successful vote in 2022, we would have been able to accelerate that development work and start construction before 2026. So it's imperative that we get a clear path to the ballot as quickly as possible so that we can restart some of those activities and get to construction as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. My next example is with State Route 30, the center segment. This is a project that gets talked about a lot because it is critically important. It's important for the movement of freight in and out of the region. It's important to relieve the congestion on I-10. It's so important that this region has committed more than $500 million for right-of-way acquisition and advanced utility relocation without a dedicated construction funding stream in place. Construction of this facility is contingent on the extension of Proposition 400, and funding is identified in phase 1. Next slide, please. However, right-of-way acquisition along this corridor is a long lead time item. It takes a long time to buy 462 parcels. ADOT has been diligently working to acquire those parcels over the last 3 years. However, more than half parcels still need to be acquired. ADOT has exhausted the right-of-way funding that we have allocated to this project through the end of 2022. As a result of the veto, construction is now uncertain. And without a dedicated construction stream, we will be unable to invest additional dollars into those right-of-way acquisition activities. Next slide, please. So that certainty is needed. And without that certainty, we're already seeing direct impacts. The project is delayed an estimated 2 years at this point. When you take into consideration inflationary cost increases, that's a $300 million hit to this project alone. That's a single project. In addition, delays in right-of-way, it's not a linear process. So if we have a 6-month delay in right-of-way, it doesn't mean that construction is merely pushed back 6 months. It is a long lead time item. It is extremely complicated. The longer we wait, the more uncertain it is that we can get to construction. So again, this will impact activities along the corridor. Moreover, there's been tremendous development interest in the corridor. A lot of the right-of-way that has been acquired so far has enabled some of that advanced development. With the veto and the uncertainty, we're already seeing impacts to that development. It's important that we get a clear path to the ballot so we can resolve these issues as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. So what are the key takeaways? Next slide, please. Investments in our region's transportation network have played a critical role in the prosperity we see today. However, it's not enough. We need to continue to invest. It's a regional competitiveness issue if we fail to invest. We will drive up the cost of doing business in the region. We will hurt local business sales. We will cost the region thousands of jobs, high quality jobs that will then go to our competitors. Moreover, timing is critical. Time is of the essence. The sooner we have a clear path to the ballot, the sooner we can rectify some of these issues. Next slide, please. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that completes our presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John and Arminta, for that very informative presentation. Are there any questions? Yes. Councilwoman, yes, go ahead.
I have a question. And this is probably just going to be in general for any and all like huge builders like TSMC. Well, they're building, et cetera. Do you know if they are contributing any funds to our infrastructure that since the infrastructure is going to benefit them?
Mr. Chairman, members of the EDC, certainly their investment is significant and of its own. That $12 billion investment is being made. The investment that we're making to the Loop 303 is funded by the region, but again, that's intended to support not just development for TSMC, but if you look at all the parcels up there, those are all prime for future development. So from a regional perspective, it's going to really open growth potential.
Okay, thank you. And for clarification, are they not going to build if 400 doesn't pass?
Mr. Chairman, members of the EDC, it's uncertain at that point. I think it's fair to say that the more reliability that business has, the more secure their investment strategies can be. And I think it's our challenge to get that reliability as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the EDC, just to clarify too, it is under construction today. And so what John's talking about, the expansion of their initial construction is what's in jeopardy. Just wanted to clarify that.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I do. Thank you. John, great presentation. And I'm sorry if I missed it, but do we have an indication of how successful a ballot measure would be if we made it to the ballot?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the EDC. That's another, I think, particularly frustrating aspect, at least from a MAG perspective. So polling conducted earlier this year had favorability north of 70%. Our out-of-state consultants, when we were doing the RTP on the front end, were astonished at the high levels of support here for transportation investments. So suffice to say, we are extremely confident as soon as this goes to the ballot, it's going to pass.
Thank you.
Yes, Council.
Did I hear you correctly when you said that this is the preview of this presentation? So you will be going out to take this on the road?
Mr. Chairman, members of the EDC, we'll certainly be giving this to policy committees throughout the month of October. We've also been working with a number of business groups, and we'll certainly be sharing this message with them as well.
Okay, and are these slides available for committee members too?
They're posted online.
Great, thank you.
Yes, go right ahead, sir.
Since it is a preview and I suspect maybe you're looking for some feedback too, terrific presentation, terrific proposal or presentation of particularly the economic development, by the way. So we talked about this a little bit at our last special meeting. And I think that really hits home a lot. My only suggestion would be that when you kind of quickly gloss over the 72 million, and I think a lot of people would kind of go, you might be a little skeptical of that. You might give a slide kind of backing into that number a bit more than what you did to make sure that the people understand that the 70-ish billion dollar savings is how the economists got to that number. But then what I loved is then you broke it down into how that money then gets spent in other ways and how it's a multiplier effect essentially. And that I would emphasize a bit more. But then the final coup de grace, I think for a lot of people in business that you're going to pitch this to, I would do it then in ROI. I would show this is the spend and then this is the return. So it's just a very simple return on investment sort of calculation that's why this makes all the sense in the world to do.
Councilman Luna.
Hey, John and Arminta, great presentation. Any sense about the governor calling a special session in November?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the EDC, I think, from our perspective, we certainly heard, support from members of the legislature to get that done. I think we've played the case too about why timing is important. So even if we don't get a special session, I think it's important that we get a path to the ballot as quickly as possible. And really one of the big elements we wanted to lay out is that timing perspective. So unfortunately, I think there was a sense that we still have 3 years to fix this issue before we get to the end of Proposition 400 cliff. When in fact, there's a lot of things that were planned to sort of go on behind the scenes to really enable, a betterment of our economy that are now impacted. And so that's messaging we're trying to get out. I think, we remain optimistic and confident in our messaging, and we'll continue to tell the story to as many people as possible to try and increase awareness.
If I could speak to that, Mr. Chairman. So we talked about it at GPEC, both executive committee and board, and actually ULI executive committee spoke about it too. And I think there's a general sense of other business groups that, to your point, that the special session is critical, that just projecting forward to this next legislature, it's a different group of people, and the prospects of getting it out of that group may be very difficult. And so there's a lot of folks that are looking to have a very discreet, very pointed discussion with the governor about a special session.
Ms. Spring, yes.
Yeah, thank you. And just to comment on Steve's point with regard to the ROI, I think that would be very impactful. The second thing was in the presentation around the center, the 30, where you gave the outlier example. I think it's great to acknowledge that, but there's so many other examples to make sure that you put in there, because very quickly you can add up, 5 years very fast, right? So I think that just lends credibility, because the thing we don't need, right, is for people to kind of poke holes when the data is so solid. So that's a recommendation. The last one is, and I felt this at the last meeting and I feel it again, is a little bit of what's next, so that as you are motivating groups, that there's a little bit of, we understand, and Steve, thanks for filling in, that there's at least a special session, but what is that timing, just so that people get a sense of what is next and what can be done?
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Those online? If not, thank you for the presentation. We'll continue to item 8, emerging economic and housing trends. This will be presented by the MAG Regional Analytics Director, Anubov Bagley, and this item is for information and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Economic Development Committee. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to give you a quick briefing on economic and housing data. So I'm going to be going through a lot of data real fast. Next slide, please. So really the good news, unemployment rate in our metro area, and when I say MSAs, Maricopa and Pinal County, is lower than the US at this time. We are 2.8%. The US is 3.5. The last time we saw a large peak, that was about 14%. That was during the pandemic. So our economy is doing well. The unemployment rate is low. Next slide, please. But the other side, inflation is higher. Our inflation in the Phoenix metro area in general has always been higher than the US. At this time, year over year, our inflation rate was 13%. That is the August 2022 data as compared to US, that being about 8.3. Housing is one of the largest contributors to that, and I'll kind of get into some of those things. Next slide, please. So our housing industry, really, if you look at it, has changed during the past 20 years. It's completely changed. And one of the things that we collect is residential completions or certificates of occupancy over time. And we've had this data for 30 years. And what you see is the bars are the number of certificates of occupancy that were issued by year by our member agencies in Maricopa County. Back in the early 2000s, we used to do about 40,000 some per year. The highest was about 48,600 back in 2005. We had the downturn, came down to about 6,600, and now is back up to about 27, 28,000. Next slide, please. But what you really start seeing is, one, that this has declined by about 43% in this last 11 years as compared to the one before. It has come back up, but overall, we're much lower than the whole time period. Next slide, please. The big change also is the percentage of apartment units. So as you saw, the housing units itself dropped by about 43%. Next slide, please. Apartments actually increased their share by about 11%. So our housing market, what we're building, the product itself has changed quite a bit. Next slide, please. Vacancy rate, this is good news. Back in 2010, vacancy rate was high. We were at about 16% overall vacancy rate, of which about 4% was seasonal, 12% of our homes were sitting vacant, foreclosure, etc. was going on at that time. This time, that's about 5% overall, at 8%. The gray bar is seasonal homes that are held for seasonal use, second homeowners, people coming in during winter months. But overall, our vacancy rate is about 7% lower than what it was at the time during our downturn. Next slide, please. In terms of pipeline, we do collect a lot of data, maintain a lot of data on active, planned, known development projects. So these projects are all projects that are approved, they're platted, they are active. Some of them have permits going on. A large number actually have permits going on these. They add up to a total of about 247,000 housing units that are sitting approved, off of which 187 are unbuilt, 187,000 unbuilt housing units at this time. In general, we've looked at the data on the completions. About 65 to 75% of the completions actually come into these known development projects. Obviously, there's a lot of projects that come in that are not in these large projects itself, but this is what's going on in terms of the.
And those are paper lots. I mean, they're platted, they're not improved.
They
right?
are platted and approved and active. They've got permits going on at this time in a lot of them. They're platted. Some of them are in that stage. Okay. So if you look at that, I've got these staged by. So there are some that are active, some are not, but about 70% of the completions are happening in these. Okay. Next slide, please. So housing prices have increased. Not a huge news. 37% year over year at this time. But the big change really, as interest rates started going up, we were at about $475,000 median sales price, all units, not single family only. Single family was actually $525,000 at that time. That has now come down from 475. It's down by about 10% to about 445,000 at this time. So we're kind of at the same median at this time as what it was in January of this year. So we've lost that increase that happened in terms of sales, what's going on. But it's still much higher in terms of what it was earlier this year or last year this time. Next slide, please. So the housing market has switched from a seller's market to a buyer's market. You now see that the numbers of the left chart is showing you the inventory. The green line is what the inventory was 2021, 2022. This year, the lowest was 8,500. This time it's about 21,800 housing units that are listed. So there is much more inventory at this time in terms of sales. And the number of days that it's taking for sales, actually the lowest was about 28 days. This is the time of multiple offers, multiple cash offers, etc. at the time. Next slide, please. And talking about cash offers, very interestingly, if you look at the sales data itself, you see about 1 in 3 units in the past 5 years have been sold for cash sales itself. There's no mortgage on it. And this is across the board, even in areas of high poverty. Next slide, please. We're looking at different metrics on why has our housing market taken off. Obviously, John's talked about all the new employers that are coming in. This is a very attractive area in terms of infrastructure, but also the fact that they are extremely attractive for seasonal investors. So we got about 26%, about 360-some thousand housing units where your situs address does not match where your property tax bill goes. That means these are seasonal investor properties, etc. 52% are living that the property tax bill goes within Maricopa County, about 4% is international. That's Canadian. 42% are from other states. So that's the whole thing that's going on in terms of what's happening behind the scenes. Next slide, please. The other thing that has changed in the past 3-4 years is really Airbnb, VRBO, etc. You've got your short-term rentals. About 1.2% of our housing inventory, housing stock, is sitting in some form of short-term rental. If you look at percent of housing stock, about 6% of Paradise Valley, about 4.3% of Scottsdale is in short-term rental. Statewide, that number is about 1.4%. Sedona, that number is about 27%. So again, it just depends on the area and what kind of housing shortage it's creating on that side. Next slide, please. So back to housing prices and apartment prices, etc. Back in 2010, 11, about 93% of our apartment rental units were in that dark blue, light green, under $1,000. That's now 10%. So apartment rents have gone up quite a bit. Next slide, please. And what you're seeing is that the newer construction is higher price per square foot. So it's about 25 to 30% higher price per square foot just because we're building a different kind of a product at this time. So it's about $2.25 per square foot as versus 1.87 of the ones that were built earlier. Next slide, please. So we've got the data in terms of percent rental increase. Reds and oranges are where those apartments increased by about 75% or 100%. So they've doubled their rent since 2017. The ones that are lower or even the ones that are higher, you see a lot of them, the highest ones are in the higher poverty areas. Those areas really switched a lot and your rent has gone up a lot in those areas. Next slide, please. So sales side, back in 2011, 12 time period, that dark blue, that light green color, under 300,000, under 200,000 was the majority of our market. Now, mind you, we were coming out of the downturn. 88% of our market was sales price at that point. That is now 13%. What you see is the higher end, above 500,000, that's really taken over. So next slide, please. So all of this, we take all of this data and say, okay, what is the housing cost burden at this time? Housing cost burden generally is identified as saying households that are paying more than 30% of their household income for housing. So this time, about 500,000 households in our region pay more than 30% of their household income for housing. About 230,000 are actually severely cost burdened. They pay more than 50%. So the map, what is showing you is where are these households. So the darkest area, the darkest red, 45% or more of those households are cost burdened at this time. Next slide, please. And if we switch this and only look at rental households, those that are renting, this is a whole different picture because rental households are way more cost burdened. So you have a lot more cost burden on the rental households. Next slide, please. So really putting it all together, cost burden is not something new. And we're not the only region in the country that actually has this. So what this slide is showing you is that gray line is total households that were cost burdened over time. Back in 2010, that number was 40%. That percentage was 40%. But the reason was different. 40% of our households back in 2010 were cost burdened because they had lost their job, They were not able to get a mortgage. Housing market had crashed. We were in a whole different place than at this time. Right now, unemployment is very low. Housing prices are high. So actually that percentage is only 30% as compared to 40% overall. But that rental, those multifamily rentals, that top blue line actually is about the same, if not higher. So multifamily rental, people who are renting, actually 50% of them are cost burdened at this time. Next slide, please. Another way of looking at it is from an economy perspective, jobs, etc. One of the data sets we have is where do people generally live? Where do they work based on a trip reduction survey? This is looking at your service occupation. So service occupation, food service workers, building, all the service, where do they live? Where do they work? And most of them generally are the darker areas that they're working in areas that are, high, large job centers. Next slide, please. These workers anchor households that make somewhere between $39,000 and $50,000 per year. Their rent or housing payment should be between $990 some dollars to $1,251. Next slide, please. Between 43 to 50% of those households are cost burden. So this is not just one income, this is that household itself. And that is kind of tying to the fact that we are having a hard time in finding workers in that sector that supports all of the other jobs in the higher sectors itself. Next slide, please. Quickly going through some census pulse data. This keeps coming in on a couple of weeks basis. 51% of households have seen a rent increase of more than $100 or more. Within those that are making less than $50,000, 8% are not caught up currently on their rent. Next slide, please. Evictions are increasing, not a big surprise, 22% increase in evictions. Total number of evictions are now back to where they were pre-pandemic. So they had declined with changes in moratorium, etc. Now they're back to the pre-moratorium. Next slide, please. And about 70-some%, not a big surprise, of these evictions are in our lower income areas. And when you see those areas, those are the same where the rents went up the highest. You're seeing all of those cost burden in those areas. Next slide, please. My final slide, that's the only one that has got tons of words. Really is one of this question that keeps coming about housing shortage. This is easier said than done. There is a lot of stuff that goes into calculating a housing shortage. It's in our opinion, in my opinion, it's more of a lack of housing choice than shortage itself. As I said, about 26% of our housing units are sitting in seasonal or investor. What you're seeing is a lack of choice, lack of housing price choice at that point of people to be able to move up or move down into smaller homes, etc. There are a number of reports that have recently come out on this topic itself. Up for Growth said there is a housing shortage in this metro area of about 108,000. Another group, Common Sense Institute, came up with a range for our region from anywhere between 11,500 to 104,000. All of these are very assumption based. There's not a lot of current data. There's not a lot of survey data in terms of that would help you understand what is totally happening within the market itself. So it's definitely something that is a lot of work to go and to do this and produce this stuff. So that's, but again, that's kind of how I want to end on this. Happy to take any questions. Next slide, please. Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. Try to rush through this in the interest of time.
No, thank you for the excellent report. I'm going to go to Vice Chair Molnar.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I think it was very, very well done. Again, a little bit overwhelming on what's really happening out there. But along with that, last year, the legislature tried to pass a bill that would take away the zoning rights of cities. And I think that goes hand in hand with this issue, with housing, with rental, with economic housing and all those kinds of things. And at least in the city of Glendale, our staff believe this bill is coming back. And we would like, and again, I'm going to jump to the next agenda item a little bit and ask for MAG to consider having the league or perhaps others come in and make a presentation to this group so that we all understand the critical nature of that happening. It impacts this. I mean, it's all about this, and I get that. But I think we need to understand what is going on at the legislature regarding this issue and them trying to basically take away all zoning rights so they can build whatever they want, wherever they want. And I'd like to ask that we bring that back from MAG. And again, thank you very much for this presentation.
Mr. Chair, members of the EDC, council member, MAG staff is working very closely with the league. All of this data, et cetera, we are providing that to the league so that, and they've contacted us to get them more data analysis, all on the land use side, development projects, land ownership, and these projects. But I agree that it'll be good to get an update. So I'll leave that to Nathan and our executive director to decide.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to add on to that. I completely agree that mandating either the conversion, the inclusionary zoning, or the conversion of commercial to residential to multifamily, that's not the direction to go. But this is a serious problem, and a lot of business groups are looking into it now because it affects our economic development, it affects our ability to create the jobs that we want for our economy, and so we've got to find another solution is the answer. And again, since I'm our MAG representative on this, MAG is looking into that. They're doing a bunch of research right now on where there could be a solution that cities hopefully will embrace, that one that's not a mandate, it's not a mandatory, you have to take away your zoning powers, but one that's more of an incentive, more of an encouragement on multifamily. Because the push-pull is that unfortunately, I think our elected officials, who a lot of them are friends of mine, they get whipsawed a lot by NIMBYism, not in my backyard, on these multifamily projects. And it's really hard on them to vote for them, yet we need them. We need the housing stock. We need the variety of product, different forms of attached product to go with the single family homes. And so we do need to work on a solution, I guess is the answer. So I would like to see, and I think MAG can play a role in that. So.
Yes, Councilwoman.
Thank you. And to the previous 2 points, I think it's important for part of that solution to include an information campaign. As a lifelong resident in Phoenix, Phoenicians have enjoyed the ability to not have to deal with density because we just kept growing farther out. And we no longer have that luxury especially with the incredible economic diversity that has occurred since the Great Recession. It has brought us some great things, but what it didn't do was prepare our citizens for the need for this higher density housing. And that really is important for them to understand how diversity in housing really benefits us all as a region. And so I hope that as part of that discussion, we will look at how do we inform our citizens about what is going on and what we've done to make our region better, but that diversity in housing will not harm their property values or necessarily their way of life.
There are no other comments. Thank you for the report. Out of respect for time, I know we're coming up on the top of the hour. We will move item 9 to our next meeting in December. So I'd like to thank the presenter for her cooperation on this. We'll go to item 10, requests for future agenda items. Are there any requests by the committee for an item on a future agenda?
You got mine already.
Yeah, yes, we have. If not, I know that we can also submit those to the staff as well for consideration. With that, we'll go down to 11, comments from the committee. Are there any comments or announcements at this time? If not, committee, the next meeting of the MAG Economic Development Committee will be on Tuesday, December 6th at 11:30 a.m. With no further business, today's meeting is adjourned and the time is 12:52. Thank you, everyone. Be safe.